The Kansas legislature has finished the fourth week of the 2010 legislative session, and as it started out, the main focus and much of the deliberations is on the state's budget. There really were two tracks that the legislature was working on this week. The first track is one where they're still trying to pass a bill early in the session that would ratify the governor's recommended cuts that he made last fall and potentially make some other cuts, all on the fiscal year budget that the state's operating on now, which ends June 30th of this year. In some of the proposals, some of these state agencies will end up taking a third round of cuts for this fiscal year if that ends up being the final bill that passes. In the meantime, the budget committees have started looking at the next year's fiscal year, which will start July 1, 2010. And as usual, the various agencies will come before the committees and present their budget, but more importantly, give a little insight into what the agency does and what budget cuts, how that will affect their agency. We participated, or at least observed, a couple of those hearings this week, one dealing with Kansas Department of Agriculture, one small piece budgetary of interest to Kansas Livestock Association is that there continues to be some funding for the 3 auction market reports that the state does in cooperation with USDA. Those reports are necessary to provide information to the Chicago Mercantile Exchange to be used for feeder cattle contracts, and since there's a lot of numbers in Kansas, it's important that those numbers be in the mix. The Kansas Animal Health Department also visited with the Budget Committee. They basically showed what they will be doing for this next fiscal year without any additional funds, which includes leaving about 5 positions open and even furloughing employees. Also in the mix with the Kansas Animal Health Department will be a bill to increase fee money to replace the money that the State General Fund cuts have left the agency in. And we'll know more about that bill and its chances as we go along later in the session. We participated in 2 hearings this week. The Kansas Livestock Association presented testimony before the House Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee on a bill that, as drafted, would repeal all of the laws that require the dams, small dams that have 30 acre-feet or more, to be inspected and to be maintained. And that's become quite a burden on some landowners. And particularly it makes very little sense if they're the only ones that are in jeopardy if the dam happens to break. So it gave us a chance to point out that sometimes development will occur below private landowner's dam that he or she had nothing to do with, but yet because of that are forced to make very expensive changes to the dam. So we'll see how that proceeds the rest of the session. Also this week was the second round of hearings that started a week ago on what EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, is asking the state to do to try to mitigate some of the smoke from burning of the Flint Hills. Our own Allie Devine presented testimony on what the Kansas Livestock Association is doing to try to work with members on what might be an acceptable smoke management plan. She also urged state legislators to perhaps push for a clear understanding from the Environmental Protection Agency as to what needs to be in that smoke management plan. There's going to be several hearings this next week. An important deadline, however, that occurred this week is bill introductions. And there's always a cutoff where these bills have to be introduced. And so the last few days there's been a proliferation of bills that have propped up. We're in the process of reviewing those. One of the bills I know that just showed up is Senate Bill 530, which would repeal all of the sales tax exemptions, including many of those that Kansas Livestock Association members believe are important on inputs, fertilizer, chemicals, farm machinery parts, labor, services, etc. In the meantime, the House Tax Committee will start hearings on another tax exemption bill, but it's important to note that that bill is more consumer-oriented. involves some of the sales tax breaks that various charitable and religious organizations have, the repairs and services that homeowners have, and a whole host of other tax exemptions, none of which in that bill are those that affect agriculture or business. So we look forward to giving you a fuller, more updated report next week.